Resonance is not a mystical abstraction, nor a poetic metaphor to be admired and forgotten. It is the quiet but undeniable signal that life constantly sends back to you, the echo that answers your inner state with precision. When you look closely, you realize that resonance has always been present, the sense that a decision feels lighter than all the other options, the flow that emerges in a conversation when both people are attuned, the effortless coincidence that seems too aligned to be random. Most dismiss these experiences as luck, as brief sparks of chance, but in truth, they reveal the fundamental nature of your relationship with reality. Resonance is reality responding to coherence. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions align, you are no longer pushing against the world, but moving with it. And that state produces an unmistakable feedback. It is as if the universe itself whispers, "Yes, this is the way." Modern life has trained us to ignore this feedback. We are taught that success comes only through force, through domination, through the constant proving of worth. We live in a culture of pressure, where value is measured by exhaustion and achievement by struggle. Yet beneath that noise, resonance quietly offers another model of power. It is not the power of pushing harder, but the power of alignment. When your inner frequency shifts, the external field reorganizes. What once seemed impossible begins to unfold naturally. What once felt heavy loses its resistance. The old paradigm of control tells you to bend reality until it submits. Resonance teaches you to tune yourself until reality reflects. The difference is subtle but transformative. One creates endless conflict, the other reveals a pathway where conflict dissolves. To feel resonance is to recognize that you are not a passive witness of events, nor a victim of external circumstances. You are not strapped into the passenger seat of life with no influence over its direction. Instead, you are in dialogue with existence itself. Every thought you dwell on, every emotion you cultivate, every state of coherence or incoherence you embody is answered by reality with striking accuracy. Fear calls back fear. Clarity calls back opportunity. Doubt attracts resistance, while conviction opens invisible doors. This is not superstition, it is the mechanics of resonance, the feedback loop between inner and outer worlds. And the more you pay attention, the more you see its patterns. Imagine standing before a great instrument, its strings stretching into infinity. Each thought and feeling is like a finger plucking one of those strings. The sound reverberates, not only within you, but outward, shaping the environment you inhabit. Resonance is the proof that the strings respond, that reality vibrates with you, not apart from you. Most people live as if the instrument is broken, as if their actions fall into a void. They push, they fight, they despair when nothing seems to move. But those who begin to notice resonance discover that the instrument has been alive all along, waiting for their awareness. The signal is subtle at first, like a faint vibration under the noise of daily life, but with practice, it becomes undeniable. This recognition changes everything. You no longer approach life as an endless battlefield where victory depends on grinding effort. You no longer chase external markers of success with blind desperation. Instead, you begin to listen. You learn to sense when something resonates and when it does not. A choice that resonates brings expansion, while a choice out of alignment brings contraction. Resonance is not about avoiding difficulty. Life will still demand growth, sacrifice, and courage, but it clarifies which difficulties are meaningful and which are self-imposed illusions. Struggle without resonance drains you. Struggle with resonance strengthens you. The distinction determines whether you walk a path of exhaustion or a path of transformation. By tuning into resonance, you reclaim your role as an active participant in the unfolding of reality. You realize that life is not a one-way stream dragging you along. It is a mirror, a responsive field, a partner in creation. The signal is always there, waiting for recognition. And when you allow yourself to trust it, you begin to live differently. You stop wasting energy on directions that collapse, and you start moving toward the ones that expand. Resonance does not guarantee comfort, but it guarantees alignment, and alignment is the ground from which authentic power arises. This is the first step, to understand resonance not as a passing feeling, but as the fundamental signal that guides you toward coherence with life itself. From the moment you are born, the world begins to teach you how to survive within its structures, but in that process, it often severs you from your own resonance. As a child, you knew instinctively when something felt alive and when it felt dead, when a person radiated warmth and when they concealed harm, when play carried joy and when it became forced. But society quickly replaced this inner compass with external instructions. Follow the rules, meet expectations, obey authority, chase approval. In this conditioning, resonance was downgraded from a guiding signal to a background noise dismissed as imagination, naivety, or weakness. By the time you enter adulthood, you are already fluent in the language of disconnection. You work at jobs that feel empty because you were told security is more important than vitality. You stay in relationships that suffocate you because you were told endurance is more valuable than truth. You suppress feelings, silence intuitions, and rationalize the dull ache inside by calling it responsibility. This is the silent epidemic of disconnection, and it explains why so many live lives that feel heavy, brittle, and strangely hollow despite outward success. The roots of disconnection run deep. They are embedded in cultural narratives that equate worth with productivity, in educational systems that reward memorization over intuition, in family structures where love is confused with control, and in media that glorifies images of power while masking the exhaustion underneath. The result is a human being trained to override their inner resonance in order to maintain belonging. Yet what is the cost of that belonging? It is the slow erosion of authenticity, the dimming of vitality, the forgetting of the signal that once guided you effortlessly. And because resonance cannot be destroyed, only ignored, its absence is felt as a constant tension. You sense something is missing but cannot name it. You seek answers in achievement, in recognition, in consumption, in relationships, yet nothing fully resolves the hunger. The disconnection feeds a cycle. The more you chase, the further you drift from resonance, and the further you drift, the more desperate the chase becomes. Modern culture thrives on this loop because a disconnected person is easier to manipulate, easier to sell to, easier to keep inside systems that do not serve them. To reclaim resonance, you must first see the machinery that disconnected you. You must recognize how often your choices are not your own, but echoes of conditioning. You must dare to notice the difference between the heavy silence of disconnection and the subtle clarity of resonance. This awareness alone does not free you, but it breaks the spell. It is the beginning of remembering that resonance was never lost, only buried beneath layers of noise. When you begin to clear that noise, even slightly, the signal returns. And when it does, you realize that what you mistook for emptiness was only the absence of alignment. The roots of disconnection are real, but they are not permanent. The soil that buried resonance can also nourish its return once you stop denying the hunger for truth. Resonance is not magic, though it can feel magical when first recognized. It follows a logic, a set of mechanics as real as gravity, and when you understand them, you begin to see why your life has unfolded as it has. The core principle is coherence, the alignment of thought, emotion, and action into a unified frequency. When these three are fractured, when your thoughts say one thing, your emotions scream another, and your actions betray both. The signal you send into reality is distorted, and the feedback you receive is chaos. But when they converge, when your mind believes, your heart feels, and your body acts in one direction, the signal becomes clear, and reality answers with synchronicity. Alignment does not mean perfection. It means integrity, a state where inner and outer stop contradicting each other. Most people live in perpetual contradiction. They long for freedom, yet cling to cages. They speak of truth, yet avoid it in daily choices. They want love, yet refuse vulnerability. They seek growth, yet sabotage the very steps that would lead there. This incoherence sends mixed signals, and reality simply mirrors back the confusion. To step into alignment requires ruthless honesty, to admit what you want, to feel what you feel, and to act in ways that honor both, even when inconvenient. It is not the path of comfort, but of clarity. The mechanics of alignment reveal that life does not reward noise, but precision. When your intention is fragmented, the results scatter. When it is concentrated, they converge. This is why some moments feel charged with flow, as if unseen forces are arranging circumstances in your favor. It is not luck, but resonance, the physics of coherence manifesting through time. Imagine your inner state as a frequency broadcast. Every thought is a vibration, every emotion a tone, every action a rhythm. And together, they create a signal that reality cannot help but reflect. If the broadcast is static, the reflection is static. If the broadcast is pure, the reflection is pure. This is the essence of why some lives seem guided by effortless opportunity, while others stumble endlessly through resistance. Yet coherence is not built by wishful thinking, but by practice, by aligning small daily choices until they form a current strong enough to carry larger shifts. Each time you speak a truth instead of hiding it, you strengthen coherence. Each time you act on a conviction instead of betraying it, you strengthen coherence. Each time you honor a genuine feeling instead of suppressing it, you strengthen coherence. Slowly, the signal clarifies, the noise fades, and resonance becomes less of a rare miracle and more of a steady rhythm guiding your path. To understand the mechanics of alignment is to dismantle the illusion that life is random, to see that the order or disorder you experience is not imposed from outside, but generated from within. And once this recognition settles, responsibility follows, because you can no longer blame chaos on fate alone. You see that incoherence breeds incoherence, and alignment breeds resonance. This awareness is not meant to burden you, but to liberate you, because if resonance responds to coherence, then every step toward alignment is a step toward power. It means the authority over your path was never fully outside your hands, but waiting in the integrity of your choices. Every life is built upon structures, and most of them are inherited long before conscious choice is possible. Families, schools, cultures, and systems construct scaffolds of belief that shape how you see the world and what you think is possible. These structures can provide stability, but they can also become cages, trapping you in borrowed definitions of success, duty, morality, and identity. When resonance begins to awaken in a person, these inherited structures start to tremble because resonance exposes what does not align. The career that once seemed respectable reveals itself as hollow. The relationship that promised safety begins to suffocate. The lifestyle built to impress others collapses under its own weight. This collapse can feel like failure, but it is the natural consequence of growth. False structures cannot endure the pressure of resonance. They crack because they were never authentic in the first place. At first, this collapse terrifies you. You may resist it, desperately trying to patch the holes in a structure already doomed to fall. You may cling to outdated identities, fearing the unknown more than the pain of falseness. But resistance only deepens the fracture, because the energy once spent maintaining illusion now demands release. Life will strip away what no longer resonates, often with ruthless precision, until you are forced to confront the emptiness beneath. This confrontation is not punishment, it is liberation, disguised as loss. To lose what is false is to regain the possibility of truth. Yet truth requires courage, because once the old scaffolding crumbles, you face the vastness of freedom with no map to guide you. Many retreat at this threshold, choosing the familiar prison over the uncertain horizon. They rebuild old cages under new names, chasing stability even at the cost of authenticity. But those who endure the collapse, who resist the urge to rebuild too quickly, discover that resonance itself begins to form a new architecture. Unlike false structures, which demand obedience, resonance demands coherence. It will not support a path that betrays your inner truth, no matter how practical or socially rewarded it may appear. It forces you to choose differently, not by external standards, but by internal alignment. This new architecture may look fragile at first, built of subtle signals and quiet intuitions rather than rigid doctrines. But over time, it proves stronger than anything false because it grows from the integrity of your being. Each choice aligned with resonance adds another beam of authenticity, and slowly a foundation emerges that cannot be shaken by external judgment. The collapse of false structures is therefore not an end, but a necessary clearing, the demolition before reconstruction. It teaches you that the pain of disintegration is also the seed of integration, that loss is not always diminishment, but preparation for a truer form of life. The old paradigm taught you to fear collapse, to see it as evidence of weakness or failure, but resonance reveals collapse as a signal that you are outgrowing what once contained you. It is the breaking of a shell so that something larger can be born. And while the process is rarely gentle, it is profoundly precise. Nothing collapses without reason. Nothing falls away unless it no longer belongs to the frequency you are becoming. To accept this truth is to stop clinging to ruins and start listening to the quiet rhythm of what wants to rise from the rubble. To live in resonance is not simply to feel occasional sparks of clarity, but to cultivate an ongoing discipline of listening, a practice that demands as much rigor as any external achievement, though its rewards are of an entirely different order. Listening in this sense is not passive hearing, but active attunement, a willingness to notice the subtle shifts within your body, your emotions, and your environment without immediately rushing to override them with thought or conditioning. Most people hear only the loud signals of life, crises, demands, alarms, deadlines, while the quiet signals pass unnoticed, yet it is the quiet ones that reveal alignment. The discipline of listening begins with slowing down enough to feel, to notice the contraction in your chest when you agree to something that betrays you, to notice the expansion in your breath when you step toward truth, to notice the fatigue that arises not from effort itself, but from effort misaligned, to notice the energy that floods you when action matches integrity. These are the signals, subtle but precise, that resonance offers at every moment. But listening requires patience, because the noise of modern life drowns them out. Endless stimulation, constant distraction, the addictive pull of technology, and the cultural worship of speed all sever your capacity to hear. To reclaim listening, you must create space, silence without agenda, solitude without fear, stillness without guilt. In that space, the body begins to speak again, the intuition begins to rise, the environment begins to reflect. At first, this practice feels unnatural, even threatening, because you have been conditioned to measure worth by productivity and to fear what silence might reveal. Yet when you endure the discomfort and stay, you discover that listening is not emptiness, but fullness, a direct encounter with the field of resonance that has always surrounded you. Over time, this listening becomes less of a practice and more of a state. You begin to walk through the world with a heightened sensitivity, aware of the invisible currents beneath the surface of events. A conversation no longer registers only in words, but in the subtle shifts of energy between you and the other. A choice no longer appears neutral, but vibrates with clarity or heaviness. Even the body, once treated as a machine to be pushed, becomes a living antenna, constantly transmitting and receiving signals. The discipline is not to interpret too quickly, not to manipulate the signal into what you wish it to be, but to remain honest in what it reveals. Sometimes resonance says no when you desperately want yes. Sometimes it closes a door you were eager to force open. The discipline lies in trusting that coherence matters more than preference, that alignment is of higher value than convenience. This is why listening is a discipline, and not merely an ability. It requires surrender of control, the courage to honor signals even when they disrupt your plans, the patience to wait when clarity has not yet come, the humility to accept that resonance cannot be faked or negotiated. Through such discipline, listening becomes the foundation of authentic power, because it ensures that your actions emerge not from fear, conditioning, or impulse, but from alignment. In a world obsessed with shouting, rushing, and forcing, the one who truly listens gains an authority that no external system can grant, because they move with the rhythm of reality itself rather than against it. Transformation does not arrive politely. It erupts when the accumulation of incoherence reaches a breaking point, when the pressure of living against resonance becomes unbearable, and the old ways of navigating reality no longer function. At this threshold, you are confronted not only with the collapse of false structures, but also with the naked truth of who you have become in the absence of alignment. And it is rarely a flattering sight. You see the compromises stacked like bricks around your authentic self. You feel the weight of choices made for approval rather than truth. You taste the bitterness of years spent chasing illusions of stability, and the recognition can feel brutal. Yet this brutality is not cruelty, but precision, because until the mirror is honest, you cannot step forward. The threshold of transformation demands a willingness to endure this honesty without retreating into distraction or denial. It is here that many falter, because the temptation to numb the pain is strong, to drown it in consumption, to bury it under busyness, to escape into the familiar anesthetics of entertainment, addiction, or endless pursuit of validation. But those who endure the fire of awareness discover that the threshold is not destruction, but initiation. Transformation requires a death, not of the body, but of the false identities that once masqueraded as you. And like all deaths, it feels final, irreversible, and terrifying. Yet the paradox is that only through this symbolic death can new life emerge. The old must dissolve, so the authentic can take root, and the process cannot be rushed, because it is not a matter of intellect, but of being. The threshold tests not your knowledge, but your courage, not your theories, but your willingness to surrender what no longer resonates. This surrender is not passive resignation, but active release, a deliberate unclenching of the fists that have clung to control. You cannot carry falsehood through the threshold, for resonance burns away what is incoherent, and the more you resist, the more painful the fire becomes. To step through is to accept loss, uncertainty, and emptiness, and yet within that emptiness lies the seed of rebirth. Those who endure discover that emptiness is not void, but space, a fertile openness in which new alignment can take shape. The discipline of listening becomes crucial here, because resonance whispers guidance even in the darkest moments, though the whispers often contradict logic or expectation. At the threshold, you learn to value these whispers above all else, to trust the subtle yes that arises in the body even when the mind trembles, to honor the deep no even when it shatters familiar patterns. Each act of trust becomes a passage through the fire, and slowly the old shell cracks, revealing a self that is raw, unguarded, and true. This stage is both the most dangerous and the most sacred, because without patience, it can collapse into chaos, but with integrity, it becomes the portal to an entirely different way of being. Transformation at this scale cannot be cosmetic. It demands total reconfiguration. Habits, relationships, ambitions, even the narratives you tell yourself, all must be re-examined in the light of resonance. Anything built on fear, shame, or pretense begins to wither, and though the loss may cut deep, what remains is unshakable. You emerge not polished, but real, not perfected, but aligned, not armored, but open. The threshold strips away what was never you, and in the aftermath, you stand closer to the essence that has been waiting beneath all along. This is why transformation is feared, because it cannot be faked, cannot be half-lived, cannot be reduced to slogans or surface rituals. It is a dismantling and a rebirth, a surrender and an awakening, a process that leaves nothing untouched. And yet those who pass through discover a freedom that the false self could never imagine, the freedom of coherence, the freedom of living without division, the freedom of resonance as a constant companion rather than an occasional guest. From this point onward, life does not become easy, but it becomes real, and reality itself begins to respond with a precision that feels miraculous, yet is simply the mechanics of alignment now operating without obstruction. To cross the threshold of transformation is to leave behind the world of pretense and to enter the terrain of truth, and though the path ahead remains demanding, it is finally your own. Authentic power does not arrive as dominance over others or control of external circumstances, but as a profound internal coherence that begins to radiate outward, reorganizing the very fabric of your life. After the threshold of transformation, when false structures have burned away and the raw self stands exposed, there is a moment of quiet unfamiliarity. You feel both lighter and more vulnerable, both emptied and strangely full. This paradox is the soil in which authentic power takes root. It is not the power to manipulate, to demand, or to conquer, but the power to move in alignment with resonance so consistently that life itself begins to bend in response. You discover that opportunities once elusive now appear without force, that relationships recalibrate around your new frequency, that obstacles which once seemed immovable dissolve as if they were smoke. None of this is coincidence. It is the mechanical unfolding of coherence, when your thoughts, emotions, and actions no longer contradict one another. When your body ceases to carry the tension of pretense, when your choices reflect your inner truth, you begin to vibrate in harmony with reality itself, and reality responds in kind. Authentic power is therefore not the assertion of will, but the dissolution of inner conflict. Imagine the energy once wasted in maintaining masks, in silencing intuition, in suppressing desires, in chasing approval, all of it reclaimed and redirected into aligned action. The difference is staggering. What once drained you now fuels you. What once confused you now clarifies you. What once enslaved you now liberates you. But authentic power also carries responsibility, because alignment exposes the cost of every false move. You cannot hide from resonance once you have tasted it. A single act of self-betrayal reverberates loudly. A single compromise feels unbearable. A single lapse into pretense burns like fire. This sensitivity is not punishment, but guidance, ensuring that you remain true to coherence. And as you stay true, power deepens, not as authority granted by systems or titles, but as presence, as a gravity that others feel without knowing why. People sense when someone lives without division. They are drawn to the ease, the clarity, the quiet authority of a being who no longer battles themselves. This is why authentic power influences without force, inspires without persuasion, leads without control. It is magnetic, not because it seeks followers, but because it embodies truth, and truth is irresistible to those who are tired of lies. Yet authentic power is not merely relational. It transforms your inner landscape as well. Fear, once the background hum of existence, begins to dissolve, because fear thrives on division, and division has collapsed. Doubt, once the constant companion of every choice, fades, because resonance speaks with unmistakable clarity. Anxiety, once the cost of trying to control the uncontrollable, weakens, because you no longer fight reality, but move with it. What remains is not immunity from pain, but freedom from unnecessary suffering. Pain still arrives, for life is impermanent, but it no longer feels like punishment. It feels like information, guiding you deeper into coherence. Even loss becomes teacher rather than enemy. Even uncertainty becomes space rather than threat. This is authentic power, the ability to remain aligned in the midst of chaos, to listen when noise surrounds you, to act when fear tempts you to freeze, to trust when logic falters, to surrender when control is impossible. It is not a static achievement, but a dynamic dance, a continual calibration to resonance, a willingness to adjust again and again without shame or hesitation. And the more you live this way, the more life reflects it back. Synchronicities multiply, doors open, connections deepen, possibilities expand. You begin to understand that what you once called miracles are simply the natural consequences of alignment. Authentic power is miraculous only to the incoherent. To the coherent, it is simply reality functioning as it always does when unblocked. And perhaps the greatest gift of authentic power is its humility. For when you taste its depth, you realize it is not yours in the possessive sense. You do not own resonance. You do not command it. You participate in it. Power does not belong to you. You belong to it. You are not the master, but the instrument, and the more you surrender to being played, the more exquisite the music becomes. This humility protects against corruption, because you know that to betray resonance is to betray life itself, and no gain could compensate for that loss. Thus, authentic power remains pure, because it is continually renewed not by ego, but by coherence. And in this state, you no longer fear the future, for the future is not something to conquer, but something to meet, moment by moment, in resonance. You no longer crave validation, for the signal within you is louder than the applause of the crowd. You no longer chase control, for reality itself is the partner that carries you forward. Authentic power is therefore not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new one, the life that unfolds when you no longer fight yourself, when you no longer negotiate with truth, when you no longer divide your being. It is the life of alignment, and it changes everything. The true test of transformation is not the intensity of the threshold or the exhilaration of authentic power, but the quiet, steady work of integration, where resonance must be woven into the fabric of ordinary life, into the daily rhythms, relationships, and responsibilities that once seemed separate from the spiritual or psychological path. It is easy to feel aligned in moments of solitude or in the heat of revelation, but the measure of coherence is how it expresses itself when you are tired, when you are challenged, when you are faced with the repetitive and the mundane. Integration begins when resonance stops being an event and becomes a baseline, when it informs not only your grand decisions, but the smallest gestures, the way you speak to a stranger, the way you respond to frustration, the way you choose food, rest, and work. At first, this demands vigilance, because the grooves of old conditioning run deep, and the pull of familiar patterns is strong. The reflex to please, to hide, to control, to escape can still surface, and each time it does, the body feels the discord instantly. Yet this discord is no longer discouraging. It is a gift, a signal that guides you back to alignment. Slowly, the nervous system learns to relax into coherence as its natural state, and choices that once required effort become spontaneous. What once felt like discipline now feels like ease. What once seemed like sacrifice now feels like freedom. What once looked like loss now feels like clarity. Integration is not glamorous. It is the patient, repetitive act of embodying resonance in situations that seem too small to matter, but in truth matter most. For life is composed not of dramatic thresholds, but of countless ordinary moments strung together. When those moments are lived in coherence, the entire fabric of existence shifts. Relationships, for example, become the crucible of integration, because it is easy to speak of alignment in solitude, but much harder to remain aligned when facing the projections, expectations, and wounds of others. Authentic power is tested in the heat of conflict, in the vulnerability of intimacy, in the tenderness of love, and the harshness of rejection. To live resonance in relationship means refusing to abandon yourself for approval, refusing to manipulate for comfort, refusing to harden for safety. It means listening beneath words, feeling the subtle cues of truth and falseness, and daring to act on them even when it disrupts familiar dynamics. Some relationships will deepen, others will dissolve, but each shift will be guided not by fear, but by resonance. And in this way, your connections become clearer, freer, more authentic. Work, too, becomes transformed. Where once ambition drove you to chase external validation, integration shifts the source of action inward. You still pursue excellence, but excellence is no longer defined by comparison. It is defined by coherence. You no longer grind yourself into exhaustion for outcomes that do not resonate. You channel energy into what feels alive, what feels true, what contributes to alignment. Ironically, this often leads to greater success in conventional terms, because resonance attracts opportunities that feel improbable to the logical mind. But even if external success falters, the inner sense of rightness remains unshaken, and that stability is worth more than any recognition. Integration also reshapes your relationship to time. Instead of living in constant anticipation of the future or regret of the past, resonance pulls you into the vividness of the present, where clarity is always available. The pressure to control outcomes softens because you trust the mechanics of coherence. You trust that aligned actions now will create aligned consequences later, without needing to micromanage every detail. This trust allows you to rest more deeply, to work more fluidly, to live with less friction. And as the grip of anxiety loosens, creativity flourishes. Ideas flow with less resistance. Solutions arise unexpectedly. Connections spark with surprising ease. Integration, therefore, is not stagnation, but expansion. The unfolding of a life that feels both more grounded and more spacious. Yet integration requires humility, because it exposes how easy it is to slip back into division. The journey is not about perfection, but about recalibration, again and again. You will falter, you will forget, you will fall into old grooves, but each return to resonance strengthens the pattern. Each correction deepens the groove of alignment. Over time, the nervous system, the mind, the body, the heart, all begin to prefer coherence, and dissonance becomes intolerable, not because of shame, but because it simply feels unnatural. Eventually, integration ceases to feel like effort at all. It feels like homecoming. This is the quiet revolution of resonance. It does not merely change your extraordinary moments, it transforms the texture of your ordinary days. And when the ordinary becomes coherent, the extraordinary becomes inevitable. Synchronicities multiply, creativity expands, relationships deepen, and even challenges become invitations rather than threats. Integration proves that resonance is not fragile, not reserved for special moments or sacred spaces, but robust, applicable everywhere. It belongs in boardrooms and bedrooms, in conversations and silences, in triumphs and failures alike. It is not a retreat from reality, but a deeper participation in it. And once this truth is embodied, life itself becomes the practice. Every moment the teacher, every breath the opportunity to align again. Stabilization is the stage where resonance ceases to be something fragile that must be constantly protected, and instead becomes the very ground you walk upon, the silent rhythm beneath every choice, the enduring foundation of a coherent life. At first, resonance can feel delicate, like a flame that flickers easily in the winds of distraction, fear, or doubt, but through the threshold of transformation and the disciplined practice of integration, what was once fragile becomes unshakable. Stabilization is the slow crystallization of alignment into identity. It is no longer something you remember to do, it is something you are. This shift is subtle, yet profound, for when resonance stabilizes, life acquires a sense of continuity that cannot be disrupted by circumstance. Challenges still arise, losses still occur, uncertainty still hovers, but none of these shake the ground beneath your feet, because the ground is no longer external. It is not dependent on approval, on security, on recognition, or on control. It is built from the inside out, and as long as coherence remains intact, the structure holds. Stabilization, therefore, is not an absence of movement, but the establishment of a stable center within movement. Imagine the still point at the center of a spinning wheel. Everything revolves, yet the center remains unmoved. This is the essence of stabilization. Life continues its endless fluctuations, but within you there is a constancy that no longer wavers. And from this constancy emerges a new quality of presence. You are no longer consumed by the noise of self-doubt or the tension of self-betrayal, and so your attention expands outward with clarity. You listen more deeply, you perceive more subtly, you respond more precisely, because the static has cleared. Others feel this presence as steadiness, as trustworthiness, as gravity, and they are drawn not to what you say, but to what you are. Stabilization is magnetic, not because it seeks attention, but because it radiates coherence, and coherence is rare in a fractured world. Yet stabilization is not merely about influence, it is about freedom. Once resonance is stabilized, you no longer live in constant negotiation with yourself. The exhausting cycle of deciding whether to betray or to honor yourself is over, because betrayal has become impossible. It simply does not occur to you to divide your being, for the cost is too obvious, the discord too painful, the alternative too natural. In this way, stabilization marks the end of inner warfare. Your energy is no longer consumed by endless battles of doubt, by the fear of making the wrong choice, by the anxiety of external judgment. Instead, that energy flows freely into creativity, into love, into contribution. Stabilization unleashes potential not because it adds something new, but because it removes the constant leakage of incoherence. And as this energy flows, life itself begins to reorganize around you. Relationships settle into balance. Work finds its rightful rhythm. The body heals from years of tension, and the mind learns to rest. Even in chaos, there is an underlying peace, for the chaos no longer enters you. It moves around you, but the center holds. This does not mean apathy or detachment. Stabilization does not dull experience, it sharpens it. Joy feels fuller because it is not contaminated by guilt. Sorrow feels cleaner because it is not twisted by resistance. Love feels freer because it is not shackled by fear. Every experience, whether painful or beautiful, becomes more vivid because it is lived without division. Stabilization is not the end of transformation, but its embodiment, the stage where practice becomes nature, where alignment is not an act of will, but a state of being. From this foundation, creativity flourishes without strain, relationships deepen without fear, leadership arises without effort, and even solitude feels rich rather than empty. In stabilization, resonance becomes not only your compass, but your anchor, not only your guide, but your home. And perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of stabilization is its ordinariness. What once felt miraculous now feels natural. What once seemed rare now feels inevitable. What once appeared extraordinary now feels simply human. You realize that resonance was never meant to be occasional. It was always meant to be the baseline of life. Stabilization restores this truth, reminding you that coherence is not a gift for the few, but the birthright of all. To live stabilized in resonance is to live in alignment with reality itself, to participate fully without distortion, to embody truth without effort. It does not make you invulnerable, but it makes you whole, and wholeness is the deepest strength there is. From here, the path continues, for stabilization is not an endpoint, but a platform, the ground from which deeper creativity, service, and exploration can emerge. But whatever unfolds, the ground is steady, the flame is constant, the resonance endures. To live resonance as a stabilized reality is not only to experience coherence internally, but to translate it into practical patterns of daily life, where every decision, every action, every relationship becomes an opportunity to embody alignment. And this embodiment generates tangible transformation in both inner well-being and outer circumstance. The final stage is not a mystical abstraction, but a profoundly practical orientation toward existence, one that continually answers the question, how do I live resonance now, in this conversation, in this task, in this conflict, in this moment of joy or sorrow? Practical living in resonance begins with awareness of the body, for the body is the first instrument of coherence. Breath, posture, and movement reveal whether alignment is present or fractured. When you breathe shallowly, when your shoulders tighten, when your stomach knots, these are not merely physiological quirks, but signals of dissonance. Stabilization teaches you to notice these cues instantly and to respond not with judgment, but with gentle recalibration, slowing the breath, loosening the body, reconnecting with the grounded rhythm that coherence requires. Such adjustments may appear small, yet they alter the entire trajectory of action. A relaxed body communicates safety to the nervous system, clarity to the mind, openness to the heart, and from that state, choices flow differently. In this way, every breath becomes a practice, every bodily gesture a tool for resonance. The second practical pillar is attention. In a fragmented world, attention is the most precious currency, and resonance thrives on focused presence. To live resonance means refusing to scatter attention across endless distractions, and instead bringing it deliberately to what is alive, to what matters. This does not mean withdrawing from complexity, but engaging it without division. When you give your full attention to a task, to a person, to a moment, you allow coherence to organize the experience, and what once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, even effortless. Thus, attention management is not a productivity hack, but a spiritual discipline. It is the art of saying yes to resonance and no to noise. The third pillar is language. Words are vibrations, and vibrations either align or distort. When you speak from resonance, your words carry a clarity and gravity that cannot be faked. They do not need to be elaborate or persuasive. Their coherence is felt immediately. Conversely, when you speak from dissonance, when you say what you do not mean, when you promise what you cannot honor, when you flatter to manipulate, your body tightens, your mind clouds, and your power dissipates. Living resonance therefore demands that language become an instrument of truth. This does not mean brutal honesty that wounds, but coherence that honors both yourself and others. Over time, truthful language reshapes relationships, work, and even your self-perception, for each aligned word strengthens the groove of resonance. The fourth pillar is choice. Every decision, from the trivial to the monumental, becomes a fork between coherence and division. To live resonance practically is to measure choices not by convenience or convention alone, but by alignment. Does this path amplify my coherence or fracture it? Sometimes the aligned choice will appear irrational to others. It may mean leaving a secure job, ending a comfortable relationship, or saying no to opportunities that glitter but do not resonate. Yet each aligned choice builds the architecture of a life that feels not only successful by external metrics, but meaningful, vital, alive. And as you practice, the fear of loss gives way to the joy of clarity, because you realize that every false gain avoided is a deeper freedom secured. The fifth pillar is rhythm. Resonance is not static, but dynamic, and practical living means attuning to cycles of activity and rest, engagement and withdrawal, expansion and contraction. Modern culture worships constant productivity, but resonance reveals that true effectiveness comes from rhythm. Just as music requires silence between notes, life requires pauses for integration. Stabilized resonance teaches you to honor these cycles without guilt, to rest fully when it is time to rest, to act fully when it is time to act. In honoring rhythm, you prevent burnout, sustain creativity, and maintain long-term coherence. The sixth pillar is relationship to community. Resonance is personal, but never private. It radiates outward, influencing and being influenced by the collective. Practical living in resonance, therefore, means choosing communities, collaborations, and environments that support coherence rather than fracture it. This may involve releasing toxic dynamics, setting boundaries, or creating new spaces where truth can flourish. It also means contributing your stabilized presence as a gift to others, for coherence is contagious, and when one person embodies it, others are inspired to do the same. In this way, resonance scales from individual transformation to cultural transformation. The final pillar is service. Stabilized resonance naturally seeks expression beyond the self, for coherence generates abundance of energy, clarity, and love that overflows. To live resonance practically is therefore to ask, how can I use this alignment to serve, to heal, to create, to uplift? Service need not be grand. It may be as simple as listening deeply to a friend, offering integrity in your work, or planting seeds of kindness in unnoticed moments. But each act of service channels resonance into the world, weaving coherence into the collective fabric of humanity. And perhaps this is the most practical outcome of all. Resonance makes you useful, not in the utilitarian sense of exploitation, but in the sacred sense of participation. You become a tuning fork in the orchestra of life, and your steady vibration helps others remember their own. To live resonance is therefore both deeply personal and profoundly communal, both inwardly stabilizing and outwardly transformative. It is not an escape from life's challenges, but a way of meeting them with clarity, courage, and compassion. It does not promise immunity from pain, but it does offer freedom from unnecessary suffering, replacing fear with trust, confusion with clarity, exhaustion with vitality. And as this becomes your lived reality, life itself feels less like a battle to be won, and more like a dance to be joined, less like a puzzle to be solved, and more like a symphony to be played. This is the culmination of the journey. Resonance not as concept, not as occasional glimpse, not even as stabilized state alone, but as a practical, embodied path that transforms every moment into an opportunity for coherence, every choice into an act of alignment, every breath into participation with truth. In this way, the extraordinary becomes ordinary, the mystical becomes practical, and the human becomes whole.